All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar about how we all work towards a fair and accurate 2020 census. My name is Beth Lynk. I'm the Census Counts Campaign Director here at the Leadership Conference Education Fund. So grateful to everyone for jumping on the phone. The goal of this call is to provide everyone on the line with an overview of upcoming census peaks. We'll be sharing how states, municipalities, and groups are engaging in the census and talk about some key next steps. I'm so delighted to be on the phone today with Vanita Gupta, President and CEO of the Leadership Conference Education Fund, Denise Hulett from the National Senior Council at MALDEF, Julie Menin at the New York City Mayor's Office. She's the 2020 Census Director there. We also have Stacey, Carless, Executive Director of North Carolina Counts Coalition, and John Foti, a Legislative Assistant at SEIU, and then Sonum Nerurkar, who's the Get Out the Count Manager here at the Leadership Conference Education Fund. So you'll get to hear from all of those wonderful speakers, and then we'll have ample opportunity for folks to ask questions at the end. But with that, I'd be delighted to turn the call over to Vanita Gupta, who will get us kicked off. Vanita?
Thanks a lot, Beth. As Beth mentioned, I'm President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and we're the nation's leading civil and human rights coalition of more than 200 national organizations working to build an America as good as its ideals. Thank you to our member organizations for joining the call today to discuss one of the most urgent civil rights issues facing the country, the 2020 census. As folks know, everyone relies on census data. Census data influence the allocation of more than $800 billion in federal government resources to states, localities, and families every year. Local community leaders use this data to make decisions about allocating resources for community needs like education, assistance for veterans, hospitals, and transportation. And businesses and entrepreneurs use census data to make critical decisions about where to locate plants and stores, hiring, and customer needs. And of course, census data are the basis for fair political representation, including both representation in the House of Representatives in Washington, but also for redistricting in the states. Historically, the census has missed certain communities, including people of color, urban and rural communities, low-income households, and young children at really disproportionately high rates. And being undercounted deprives these communities of equal political representation and private and public resources for things like highways, healthcare, and education. And it's more important than ever that for national, state, and local groups to actually work together to ensure a fair and accurate count. We know that the 2020 census faces unique challenges, making it critical that our coalition step up to ensure that our communities are not missing in the 2020 census. And let me just describe a few of the key challenges that are unique to the upcoming 2020 census. For one, the 2020 census is chronically underfunded compared to previous census cycles. Insufficient, uncertain, and frequently late annual funding has already delayed and derailed important testing and preparations. Most at risk are operations specifically designed to reach historically hard-to-count communities, such as partnership and communications programs. Also, the administration has created a climate of fear that could depress participation in many communities. Many people will be reluctant to provide personal information voluntarily to the government, and this was even before the citizenship question was added to the census. The third is that 2020 census marks the first high-tech census ever, and there's no question that modernizing the census is important. That technology also brings cybersecurity threats, real or perceived, and the challenge of the digital divide. And then fourth, as I've already referenced, the citizenship question, which we know Secretary Roth added back in March of 2018, and there's a number of litigations right now that we'll talk about challenging that question, and we are doing everything we can to seek the removal of the question. But it's critical that the 2020 census is fair and accurate so that communities of color, immigrants, indigenous communities, and more don't lose out on their fair share of political representation and federal funding for programs like healthcare and education. As you're going to hear on the call, national groups and their affiliates are already working for census advocacy and are planning the Get Out the Count work that needs to happen. The New York cases challenging the citizenship question are now before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court took those cases last week, took the case last week, and these are good examples of the type of alliance that we've built, including plaintiffs that are states, cities, NGOs, the collection of these myriad groups that are supported through the amicus campaign and outreach work by national organizations. We would really love to have each of you join us on the Census Counts Day of Action 1 year out from the count on April 1st, 2019. And Sonum's going to share more details later on the call about that day of action. But if I can leave you with one message, let it be thus. Our communities will be missing in the 2020 census and get fewer resources and representation than they deserve if we as the civil and human rights groups don't show up and do everything we can to get out the count. There just are no do-overs with the census, and we're going to be stuck with the numbers for 10 years, and we just simply cannot afford that. And that's why the Leadership Conference has made the 2020 census a top priority. So let me thank you for joining the call today, and we hope that this information on the webinar today is going to get your thoughts flowing about how your organization and constituents can engage in the Census Get Out the Count efforts. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vanita. With that, this is Beth Lynk again at the Census Counts Campaign Director at the Leadership Conference. I'm just going to talk us through and get us oriented around some key peaks as folks start to think about the census, and then we'll have an opportunity to hear from our speakers about what's happening at the city level, at the state level, and at the national level with groups, and all of the different ways that folks can get engaged. So let me just introduce, for folks who may not know, the Census Counts campaign is a collaborative effort that we are engaged in with a number of key national partners. We work with groups like NALEO, AAJC, Color of Change, and many, many more to ensure that the community overall has the resources, the education, and the opportunities to engage around a fair and accurate count. We also work with community-based organizations in more than 30 states and growing, and there's always an opportunity for more people to be engaged in this effort. And if you're interested, please reach out to us and we'll get you plugged in. A big output of the campaign is resources and information sharing. So here you'll see a current screenshot of our current website, censuscounts.org, where we've got over 50 different fact sheets and resources available and growing every single day. We actually just released a new info sheet and resource for folks who are interested in engaging in the April 1 Day of Action that are all available on censuscounts.org. We'll be updating this site, and soon it will be organized by state and by issue. And so for folks who are looking for specific details of what's happening in their state, the censuscounts.org will be a great place to find that. If we can just go to the next slide. So the State Count Action Network, which I mentioned, we currently have state tables engaged in 30 states. You'll see the states here. We have points of contact that are leading in each state. If you are looking to get connected, please let us know. We work in close partnership with organizations like State Voices, who have state tables in many of these states, as well as the local groups that are engaging at the state level. So just to anchor us in timeline and where we're going over the next 18 months or so, we're really thinking about this campaign in 3 phases. And you'll see marked on this chart are some key peaks and opportunities that people can think about plugging into. And some just flags for folks to keep in mind as you think about the census. So right now, we're really in this phase 1 of information, education, and advocacy. Then we'll move into an engagement and mobilization phase, and then we'll be in the phase of non-response follow-up and really chasing that census participation, particularly in communities that are historically underrepresented in the census. A few key peaks I just want to make you aware of before in the next few months. Folks are aware that, as Vanita mentioned, the Supreme Court has taken up the New York cases challenging the citizenship question, and Denise will talk much more about that. I do want to let you know, I think at the same time that that's happening, there are congressional opportunities to remove the citizenship question, and we're really seeing that as a good organizing peak, as we know that congressional recess will be happening in April and May, and it's an opportunity for groups to push members to sign on. It's called the Census Idea Act, to host town halls, to do outreach efforts. So we're seeing that as a real opportunity. In addition, just want to make people aware that there's the deadline for the removal of the citizenship question is in June. As we look kind of further into the year, in August, we'll be gearing up to ensure that there's full funding for the census, and so August will be a good opportunity to do that during August recess as we go to the FY 2020 funding deadline in September. And then one last thing I'll just mention is that we know that the Census Bureau's advertising campaign and many of our partner groups are thinking about having advertising and work that's happening in addition to advocacy and organizing efforts. Not that it's missed anybody's radar, but this will all be happening at the same time of the presidential primaries, and so just for folks' awareness. As you're thinking about census peaks, and our other panelists will get into this in more details, this is really just a general timeline of census operations and what needs to happen to ensure that there's a fair and accurate count. So right now, states are setting up complete count committees. We know that it's critical that we secure state funding so that community-based organizations can do the outreach that's necessary. The census is hiring, and so ensuring that they're the right candidates that represent communities are being plugged in there. And then we'll see get out the count efforts take place in earnest in phase 2, and then that non-response follow-up when the Census Bureau will send out their enumerators into the field. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn the call over to Denise, who will give us a bit more of an update about the citizenship question, which I know is top of mind for many folks, and the national efforts around that work. Denise?
Hi, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about the citizenship question and the litigation that is challenging the addition of that question to the 2020 census. There are currently 6 cases across the country specifically challenging the administration's last-minute decision to add that question to the 2020 census. The litigations filed on behalf of states, cities, counties, individual voters, community-based organizations. It's filed by state attorney generals, civil rights organizations like MALDEF and Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Lawyers Committee, and ACLU, also county counsel and private co-counsel. 2 of those cases are in California, 2 are in New York, and 2 are in Maryland. They are consolidated in pairs, and the claims are that the addition of the citizenship question violated both constitutional and statutory law and will result in disproportionate undercounts, which leads to all kinds of injuries. All 6 of our cases allege a violation of the Administrative Procedures Act, and that requires that Secretary Ross, who's charged with the conduct of the census, has to disclose the rationale for his decision, that the rationale can't be arbitrary and capricious, that it can't be a lie, and that it has to be in accordance with the law. Some of the cases also have a claim under the Enumerations Clause of the Constitution. That's the clause that requires the Secretary's conduct to bear a reasonable relationship to the actual enumeration of the total population. That sounds like a low bar, because it really is, kind of. One of the New York cases and our Maryland case, the MALDEF Maryland case, also had an intentional discrimination case. And in that case, we allege that the purpose of adding the question was to discriminate against immigrants of color and those who live in proximity to them, primarily Latinos and Asians. So that they went forward not simply in spite of the impact on those populations, but because of it. Also, only our case in Maryland alleged a violation of a very, very old statute known as the Klan Act, which is a civil rights act that prohibits a conspiracy to violate constitutional rights. In that cause of action, we allege Secretary Ross didn't make this decision himself. He was not the sole decision maker. But instead, early on, soon after he took office, he conspired with Chris Kobach, Steve Bannon, Trump, and other White House officials, later on bringing in Jeff Sessions, and his purpose was to provide the rest of them with a pretextual reason for adding the question. But that those are the decision makers as a group, and they did this purposefully in order to violate the constitutional rights of Latinos and Asians and immigrants of color. The injuries that are alleged are somewhat different in each one of these cases, and I'm getting detailed because it's going to impact what happens in the Supreme Court. But the injuries we allege are a little different in each case, but they involve loss of federal funding, loss of congressional seats, loss of political representation within states, and for the organizational plaintiffs, also diversion of resources as they attempt to mitigate the damage that the citizenship question is going to do in this already politically charged anti-immigrant environment. There were 3 trials, 2 cases consolidated in each, one in Maryland, one in New York, and one in California. Each trial involved approximately a dozen expert witnesses who presented statistical analysis to predict the disparate impact on the total count and on political representation and funding. Now, DOJ defended all 3 of the cases. We finished ours, just last week we finished our closing argument, which went all day in that one, and we were the last trial to finish in Maryland. DOJ's defense is basically, look, there's nothing to see here. Secretary Ross simply had an idea. Now, he's a banker, but he just had this idea all by himself. He talked to a number of agencies about it. He consulted with the Census Bureau. He cut through a little red tape, and then he made a very reasonable decision to add the question to the census. Unfortunately, that's apparently how Justice Gorsuch sees it as well. Our view, on the other hand, is that Chris Kobach, Steve Bannon, cooked this idea up initially. They ran it by Trump, who authorized them to convey it to Ross, who then had to manufacture a reason to ask the question so late without any testing at all, which is just unheard of, without complying with any of the Census Bureau procedures. And contrary to all the warnings he got from inside and outside the Census Bureau, the warnings that he got about what was going to be the impact on response rates, and how that impact was going to be disparate, and it was going to disparately harm certain communities. So after ignoring all of that procedure, all of that advice, Ross's aides realized that they were going to have to need a reason to put this on, other than the fact that the administration wanted it. So his aides first asked the DOJ, will you request that we add this question to the 2020 census? And they said no. So then he asked the Department of Homeland Security. They also said no. So then Secretary Ross got Jeff Sessions on the phone personally, told him about the problem, and Jeff Sessions was eager, very eager to help provide Secretary Ross with a bogus reason. And that reason is that DOJ wrote a letter claiming that the addition of the question is going to help the DOJ enforce the Voting Rights Act on behalf of minority voters. And during trial, they actually presented that with a straight face. Now, all 3 trials have now taken place. In New York, the plaintiffs prevailed on their Administrative Procedure Act claim, but they lost their discriminatory intent claim because they couldn't tie the discriminatory motives of Kobach and Trump and Bannon to Ross. And Ross himself doesn't have the record of discriminatory, racial, and anti-immigrant public statements that they all do. California and Maryland, as I said, are also done with trial and post-trial briefing, and we're waiting on our district court judges to issue opinions. So what's in front of the Supreme Court now is the New York judge's decision, and that's where it gets kind of complicated because, as I think Benita said, or one of the slides I saw said that the deadline is June for the printing of the of the census ballots. We've also heard some evidence in these trials that it could be pushed back. It would be more expensive, but it could be pushed back to the fall. The New York appeal that's in front of the Supreme Court, which completely skipped the Second Circuit, is only on that Administrative Procedure Act and only on what the New York judge found, Judge Furman. He found that there will be a loss of congressional seat in California and likely also New York and Illinois. He found there's going to be funding losses. He found a federal funds by states, cities, and individual members of organizations. He also found that there was an injury that was caused by harm to the quality and the accuracy of data, and that was going to be suffered by governmental plaintiffs who use the data to allocate resources. And then finally, he found, as we allege in our suit as well, diversion of resources by organizations who work on census issues. So the question is then, what happens if the U.S. Supreme Court reverses that New York decision? The schedule is that on the 6th of March, the administration files their brief. On the 1st of April, plaintiffs file their brief, and that's also when amicus briefs are due. And then there's a hearing on April 23rd. What is key here is that there are issues and claims in our Maryland case and one in the California case that are not before the U.S. Supreme Court in the New York case. One of those issues has to do with an injury based on intrastate redistricting, that there's going to be a disproportionate impact resulting in loss of political representation in state legislatures and in congressional districts within each state, even in county supervisorial districts. There's also an enumeration clause in our case and the California case that's not before the Supreme Court. There's also a discriminatory intent claim, which we worked very, very hard on, and we were able to get some evidence in our Maryland case that ties President Trump to this decision in a way that they were not able to get in the New York case. The reason that's key is because that requires a much higher standard of scrutiny by the U.S. Supreme Court, by any court that looks at an intentional discrimination claim, than the APA claim does. So the question is no longer whether if the intent claim is granted, found in the Maryland case, the question is no longer whether the decision was reasonable or rational and barely compliant with the law. It's not just did it have a rationale that Ross reasonably believed, but whether the decision was racially discriminatory, even in part. And if so, whether they would have added that question even absent that discriminatory motive. Our 1985 conspiracy claim that I talked about rests on those same facts, although it requires a meeting of the minds of Trump and Sessions and Ross and Bannon and Kobach, which sounds a little scary. If our judge in Maryland rules in favor on either of those claims, the intent claim, the conspiracy claim, or on the enumeration clause, or on the interstate standing question, then the U.S. Supreme Court decision cannot be dispositive of our cases. So the U.S. Supreme Court could then, at that point, wait and consolidate all the cases, or because we do expect our opinions from the district courts pretty soon, or I suppose it could wait for a separate appeal. I don't know. U.S. Supreme Court scholars would probably have some better predictions about that. Amicus is being organized and coordinated by the Leadership Conference and the Brennan Center. I don't know whether they've solidified all of the filers yet, but they're going to be amicus similar to what's been filed in the New York cases in the district court level, and in our case, from the Leadership Conference, from former census directors, businesses, the American Statistical Association, Common Cause, those kinds of people, and congressional and Senate leaders and counties. So there's one last quick thing that I want to say is that there's another related case to this in which we've intervened, and that's a case filed by the state of Alabama. They sued Commerce, asking the judge to order them to exclude undocumented immigrants from a total count. They don't say exactly how they're supposed to do that. We intervened in that case, as did the Lawyers Committee, and we're currently briefing whether that case should be dismissed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Denise. That is so helpful to have an update on all of the cases. As Denise mentioned, there are those On the citizenship question challenges, there are those three buckets of cases. We are expecting that the amicus briefs are due on April 1, 2019. We will be circulating a civil rights brief for sign-ons. If you're interested in that, please reach out to Corrine Yu or just follow up after this call. And then the Supreme Court oral argument, there's certainly the other cases that are continuing to move. The Supreme Court oral argument right now is scheduled for April 23rd. So with that, we are going to move to Julie Menin from the New York City Mayor's Office. So Julie, if you're able to jump in, I will turn that over to you.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much. So first of all, Beth and Benita, thank you so much for organizing this call. It's really helpful, and I really appreciate being able to participate. So I really wear two hats in my role here in New York City. One is as a census director, two, a legal role as executive assistant corporation counsel for the city's law department. And I just mentioned that because the city's law department is one of the plaintiffs on the New York case. So I know that's already been covered, so I won't be covering that, but I did just want to mention that as well. So I think Benita really laid out what's at stake in terms of the funding, but this is something obviously that's of great concern to New Yorkers, everything from public schools to public housing, Medicaid, SNAP, WIC programs, so many programs that many residents in our city depend on are at stake here. And in New York State, we could lose up to 2 congressional seats in an undercount. One of the things that we're most concerned about, obviously, vis-a-vis the citizenship question is irrespective of whether we win or lose with the New York case, and obviously it's our fervent hope to win, and we believe we're 100% right on the facts and law, but some of the damage has already been done. The mere asking of a citizenship question has basically frightened immigrant communities across our city and certainly throughout the country. We're a city of 38% immigrants, so we really have our work cut out for us in terms of what we need to do. One of the things that we're really focused on is partnering with trusted community organizations on the ground, because they really are the trusted voices in communities across New York City. So we're going to be working very much with NGOs, with immigrant groups, labor, houses of worship, and we're also working with all of our sister city agencies. One advantage we have in New York is because it is such a vast city and because we have a very large city government with many myriad agencies, we can partner with them because they have so many touch points where they touch all of our, really all New Yorkers. So we're going to be working very closely with them. We're also going to be doing a mass media campaign that is really micro-targeted to communities across the city. 2 areas of particular concern. We have the lowest response rates in New York in 2010 were in the African American and Orthodox Jewish communities. So those are 2 communities that historically have been hard to count, and so we know that we need to do extra work there. In terms of the citizenship question, what we're really focusing on in messaging is Title 13 of the U.S. Code, which of course protects the confidentiality of responses. So we have, while we wait to see what happens with the Supreme Court case, we are really focused on making sure people understand that Title 13 does protect their confidentiality. We also, and I know it was talked about the online component, while of course we're concerned about cybersecurity and other concerns, there is a huge advantage to the online component, which is getting real-time data, which before we were never able to get. So we're actually pleased about that because it's going to allow us to be able to, in a city as vast as New York, quickly be able to send in resources and outreach teams to go into neighborhoods where there hasn't been much of a response. We have our work cut out for us, obviously, for all the reasons I stated. New York City has traditionally not had a great self-response rate. We know, obviously, self-response is the most accurate response rate, so we're really focused on that number. Traditionally, it had been 61.9% versus a national average in 2010 of 76%. So we're really working on new outreach methods to make sure that we boost our self-response rate numbers as high as possible. So in the interest of time, I'm going to stop there, and of course, at the end, happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. With that, we're going to turn to Stacey Carless from North Carolina Couch Coalition. And Stacey, just let us know when you want us to switch slides.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, Beth, for organizing this. Again, my name is Stacey Carless, and I'm the Executive Director of the NC Counts Coalition. And it's a pleasure to speak with you all today as a partner to the States Count Action Network. The States Count Action Network is a hub for state groups to come together and learn about all things census related, share best practices via monthly calls and quarterly in-person meetings, one which will be tomorrow. And the monthly calls take place on the first Thursday of every month. Around 30 states are a part of the States Action Network, and they're looking to expand to other states as well. So if anyone on the meeting today is interested in joining, I definitely encourage you to contact Sergio Lopez, who is amazing to work with, and his email is lopez@civilrights.org. And before I get into the work taking place in North Carolina, I just want to give you a little bit of background on our state and why the census is important to us. So North Carolina is home to about 10.3 million people. We're the 9th most populous state in the nation. Between 2010 and 2017, we experienced the 5th largest numeric growth and added more people than New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio combined. And our state demographer projects that North Carolina will have more than 10.6 million residents by 2020. So as one of the nation's fastest growing states, we have a lot at stake in the 2020 census. It directly affects the allocation of $16.3 billion annually in federal resources to our state, as well as it ensures that the communities are appropriately represented in the State House and in Congress. North Carolina is expected to pick up a congressional seat with a complete and accurate 2020 census count. And of course, because this information will be used for redistricting, which is really important to the social justice advocates in our state who are committed to eliminating gerrymandering. So this slide just kind of shows you how we break down the unofficial leadership structure for census in North Carolina. We have the NC Complete Count Commission at the top, which was established by executive order by the governor in 2018. And that group is really a group of state leaders who will advise the governor on what needs to happen at the state level for complete and accurate census. So we refer to them as the strategists and the advisors to the governor. And then the bottom gear is the U.S. Census Bureau, which of course they actually implement the census. And in between you have the NC Counts Coalition. And our organization serves as a hub to facilitate cross-sector coordination among government, planning, and community organizations, service providers, businesses, and others to achieve a complete and accurate census count for North Carolina. We serve as the information and resource hub for census information in our state, and we are strategists, conveners, connectors, and coordinators for strategic planning. Next slide, please. All right, so this slide just kind of gives you a little breakdown of our timeline, so you can get an idea of how the coalition and our partners are coming along and moving forward with census work. So as you can see, in 2017, we spent some time learning about and understanding the census. And we also identified our stakeholders, and we did a lot of LUCA outreach, which is the local update of census address operation, to our local governments to encourage North Carolina counties to participate. And just to kind of give you an idea of the success of the LUCA outreach, North Carolina did have 88% participation for the state for LUCA. In 2018, we began engaging stakeholders through Census 101 education. We developed a statewide strategic plan that identified our challenges and assessed the needs of our states. And we also did a decent amount of advocacy to support funding the census and removing the citizenship question in with our congressional delegation through sign-on letters and Hill visits. And that brings us to 2019. And this year, we're really going to be focusing on turning our stakeholders into partners, and we're attacking our challenges. And we are really beginning our education and convening role by hosting statewide conferences and regional meetings to help our counties develop high-impact complete count committees. And of course, we're going to continue our advocacy efforts on the federal level to have the citizenship question removed, but we're also going to begin advocacy to our local elected officials as well. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about some of the challenges that are unique to our state and how we are attempting to overcome those challenges. So like every other state, we have our hard to count communities, which there are about 950,000 individuals in our state that live in hard to count communities. And those communities are renters, 18 to 24-year-olds, children under 6, American Indian, Hispanic, and Black households, and migrant households. But in addition to the traditional hard to count communities, we're also dealing with the digital divide, a lack of state funding to support the 2020 census preparation, decreased resources from the U.S. Census Bureau, and the chilling effect of the citizenship question. So first, the digital divide. The U.S. Census Bureau is rolling back door-to-door canvassing and focusing more on internet-based responses. This will affect obtaining an accurate count of communities that don't have access to the internet. There's about 24% of North Carolina households, primarily households in rural and low-income communities, that do not subscribe to the internet. So what we're doing at the coalition is we're actually working with the State Library of North Carolina to ensure that all libraries and hard to count communities have internet access portals that the librarians can share information on the census, and so that folks in those communities will have access to the census when the census comes around. Next is our lack of state funding. So in 2010, North Carolina appropriated $750,000 for decennial census preparations. In 2018, Governor Roy Cooper requested $1.5 million for 2020 census preparations, and that request was denied. So as I mentioned before, the governor did establish the state's Complete Count Commission, but ultimately that commission is going to lack impact if it does not have the funds it needs to support education, outreach, and marketing. So from the coalition standpoint, in partnership with the State Innovation Exchange, also known as SIX, we're organizing a legislative briefing with the North Carolina General Assembly to educate our elected officials on the importance of the census to North Carolina and the importance of funding census preparations for the state. And then our next challenge is reduced resources. So in 2010, we had a regional census office in Charlotte, and that office has closed. So now our office is located in Atlanta, Georgia, and it is incredibly difficult to actually get a hold of anyone from the Georgia office. Additionally, due to the inadequate and late funding, North Carolina has actually lacked human resources from the Census Bureau. And so we only had 2 partnership specialists until like 2 weeks ago for the entire state. So our organization has been working to fill in the gaps by reaching out to our local elected officials to encourage development of complete count committees. And then finally, of course, we have the citizenship question. So our state is home to more than 750,000 foreign-born individuals, and we're the 14th largest foreign-born population in the United States. More than 300,000 individuals have already become naturalized citizens, and many more are or will be eligible to apply for citizenship. The newly added and highly controversial citizenship question is, of course, in litigation, and as you heard before, we expect to have a response from the Supreme Court. However, the reality is, regardless of the status of a citizenship question, the very fact that there is a question has created a chilling effect where people are questioning the integrity of the census, and considering the current political environment, folks are concerned about the possible misuse or abuse of information collected. And to give you an example, we witnessed the skepticism firsthand from our trusted messengers. So we hosted a statewide convening on January 31st. An attendee asked the exact question: how can we be sure that ICE will not show up at the door of people who complete the census with a citizenship question if it ends up on the survey? We want to encourage our immigrant population, but we are not convinced with the current administration that they would not use this information to arrest and deport non-citizens. So to add, just more fuel to that fire, we had a week straight a couple of weeks ago where 200 undocumented immigrants across North Carolina were arrested as a result of ICE raids. And according to a newspaper article, the ICE Atlanta Field Office Director Sean Gallagher called ICE's actions the new normal. And he stated, if they're undocumented and in the wrong place at the wrong time, my officers will take enforcement action. So of course, through the coalition, We support the work of the national efforts to remove the citizenship question. North Carolina did join on to one of the lawsuits, as well as one of our partnering organizations, El Pueblo, was also a part of a lawsuit. So we try to, engage with some of our trusted messengers who are having issues grasping, whether or not they should encourage community members to take the census. Because we realize that, there's definitely a lot of reasonable concern out there. So what we're doing is we're starting to build relationships with our trusted messengers connected to our immigrant communities and educating them on the census operation, but we're also hearing their concerns and understanding what information and or resources they need to develop confidence in the census operation. And of course, we expect this to be an ongoing discussion for our group. Next slide, please. So with that, I just want to conclude with we find the keys to success to really be in building partnerships and creating collaborative opportunities. And these are just some pictures from our statewide convening. So again, government folks, they have a lot of information and resources. And so we want to connect them to our trusted messengers who will ultimately mobilize and lead to census participation. And we're doing this again through workshops and statewide convenings to get that conversation going. And then the next slide. Next slide, please. And then also we encourage folks to continue to advocate for the census, to have the citizenship question removed. And in North Carolina, we are going to continue to create advocacy opportunities with our General Assembly to educate them on what's happening so that hopefully they will fund some of the commission's work. And that's all. I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Sonum Nerurkar and John Foti. Sonum?
Great. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Get Out the Count, and I think we heard from Stacey and others about how important and how incredibly important it is to have a really robust Get Out the Count plan in order to make sure that trusted messengers and community members are hearing from people that they trust in the community about the importance of the census and getting education and getting out the count. So I wanted to quickly go over the timeline here. So from now until June, it's really about building and creating coalitions at the state level and at the national level, thinking through what are the hard to count communities in your area and how are you bringing them to the table to make sure that they can provide input on how to do this outreach. From June to December of 2019, there's going to be a big increase in census hiring for enumerators, and it's so incredibly important that these enumerators are people from the community so that while they are doing door knocking, people answering the doors are not afraid of these people that are coming from the government and can actually see people that look like them and are part of their community and can trust them in having filled out the census. And along with the census hiring, there's going to be education and media outreach and material development that needs to happen between now and then so that people are really ready for the January through June 2020 Get Out the Count. So things to focus on, education is key. People in the community may not know what the census is and may not even remember filling it out in 2010. So it's really important that they know, hey, this is coming in your community and we need to be seen, we need to be heard, we need to be counted so that we're able to get the representation and the resources that our communities deserve. And most importantly, as you are pulling together your coalition, making sure that it is a diverse coalition, really representing those hard to count communities. There's no way to understand how to do this outreach to hard to count communities if they're not a part of that coalition. And as we are getting closer and closer to GOTC, it'll be incredibly important to make sure that you have a robust field, digital tech, and communications components to your plan. Great. And so one big thing to talk about between now and 2020 is that our April 1st, 2019 Day of Action is coming up. It marks 1 year out from Census Day 2020, and it's a perfect opportunity to educate people on the ground and at the national level about the census, and that it is coming and that it is extremely important. So there are going to be numerous national and in-state activities that are happening, and we really encourage you all to think through how your members can participate and how your organization can participate in some of these activities. So just some examples of ways to get involved. You can organize an event, host a rally, a town hall, a press conference, or even a lobby day, and invite your entire coalition, members, partners, and community members to come out and hear why the 2020 census is so critical to your community. Meet with your member of Congress, state legislator, or mayor. We're hearing so many examples of the lack of funding at the state level. Just use this as an opportunity to really push for that state funding for community-based organizations to do this outreach to hard-to-count communities. There are going to be communications and digital activities. We're going to be hosting through the Census Counts Coalition, which is a broad coalition of national and state groups that are working on the census, to share a census pledge saying, I pledge to be counted in 2020. If you are a part of an organization, join the pledge. You can reach out to me after the call, and I'd be happy to get you set up. Host or join a Twitter storm, or write a letter to the editor, an op-ed. And reach out to your local media outlets. As you're building your Get Out the Count plans, it'll be so important to make sure that the media outlets that are both local and also ethnic media are being briefed and educated on the census itself. And then think about all the other organizations and businesses and local electeds that should be a part of this. So for April 1st, 2019, think about how you can involve those small businesses in educating their employees or using their influence to post on their social media accounts, or even posting flyers. And think about the local communities that involve faith networks and how they can potentially post in their faith bulletin about the importance of the census. So these are just a couple of ways to get involved, and I'd be happy to talk to anyone after the call or after this webinar about ways they can get involved, and I will send around my information afterwards. But I want to give some time to John Foti, so I'm going to turn it over to John to talk a little bit more about GOTC at a national level. Go ahead, John.
Thank you so much, Sonum. And as others have said, thank you to the Leadership Conference for inviting us to take part in this webinar. It's great to be talking census and how our members are engaging. So here's how national groups can help get out the count. And the way I tried to think about this was how SEIU got involved in this census compared to 2010. So the first thing is to really know how the census impacts your organization, your members, and their communities. This seems like a given, but it's always best to sort of do an assessment of your organization in a real-world context. So for example, when we were thinking about the census and how to talk about it with our members, we focused on things like federal funding that translates into state funding that funds hospitals and which our nurses represent. We thought about the civic participation angle in which, voting and political redistricting. All of these things are examples of how you can make the census personal to your members and to your organization and get them to realize that they have as much of a stake in the census as anyone else. The next sort of step is to be able to, for those national organizations with local affiliates and state affiliates, to be able to identify their capacity to engage at the state and local level, and to also do that focusing on your strengths. So, what we really tried to do with our census work was to align it with the rest of our issue campaigns, so it didn't seem like it was coming out of left field, but also that folks understood that the census is intrinsic to the work that our union does on a daily basis. And again, that goes from everything from the hospitals in which our nurses work at, to the daycare centers in which our child care providers provide that care, and also how funding is allocated based for home care workers through Medicare and Medicaid. So it's always about thinking about how you can translate those big national umbrellas down into granular details to make it personal for folks, and also be able to use your local and state affiliates to be able to engage on that level. The next best thing you can do is also provide resources to your state and local affiliates. And this it mostly takes the form of information we have found through our organization and talking with our other national partners. Most folks just don't have all the census knowledge that I think people who have worked on it here in DC for decades have. And mostly what they need is information. They need to be pointed in the right direction. They need to again know how the census impacts the organization. And sometimes it's going to be state specific too. So if you have a local affiliate in New York, their need is going to be different from your local affiliate in Tennessee. But there are still helpful resources that the Leadership Conference, the Census Counts campaign, and also others have put together that can really help you. And the most we have found that is really helpful is the 2020 Hard to Count map, where folks can use a tool to basically see where in their communities there are hard to count tracks and know where they have to focus their energy in community organizing. The next best way national groups can help get out the count is to translate your federal advocacy into state advocacy. So as many as others have mentioned, things like funding for complete count committees, things like confidentiality and getting trusted community leaders to speak and ensure communities that their data will be protected and that they themselves can have confidence in filling out the census. Those are all things that happen at the federal level, but that you can also do at the state level. And for example, our SEIU Pennsylvania State Council was just announced last week as a partner member of the Pennsylvania Census 2020 Complete Count Commission. That is sort of our state council, which is made up of all the SEIU locals in Pennsylvania. They are taking the initiative to make sure that they are at that table and that they are providing information and insight into how these communities are responding to the census, but also acting as a trusted actor and engaging our members and being a part of the census. And that's what we have really found, is that folks in communities want to hear from trusted folks who work with them, who go to their church on Sunday, who they see at the Rotary Club, all those things. It's all about making sure that you have trusted advocates and that you can do that by providing the national information to your state affiliates so they can use that information to utilize already existing relationships. Next slide, please. And the next thing you can do is use key dates and census planning as opportunities and springboards. As Sonum mentioned, the April 1st Day of Action is a great first springboard and opportunity to get your community engaged, and also a good way for national groups to provide information to their state affiliates about getting engaged on that Day of Action, or just join the Day of Action nationally. A lot of the times having an echo partner and having folks talking about the same thing is just as effective as sort of hearing things in this community, because it sort of transcends everything else. Moving on, as previously mentioned, and sort of just to succinct this a little bit, best thing to always do is to integrate the census into core issue campaigns. So for example, at SEIU, we have standing voting rights campaigns. Our Racial Justice Center is always working on issues of racial and social justice, and we have integrated the census into all that work to make sure that while we are focusing on the more priority issues for our members in their workplaces, we are also focusing on this as a component to that. And that helps sort of get into folks' heads and also really continue to engage on the point that the census is something that is really important, not just for April 1st, 2020, but also for the 10 years beyond that. And that the decisions and the way folks are counted next year has a lasting generational effect on everyone. The next thing you can also do is develop a digital and communication strategy to raise awareness and engagement online. This can be anything from petitions, signing up to be counted, as Sonum mentioned. We are planning to do that both internally and externally to make sure that we're not only taking stock of our members who are saying, yes, I'm going to be counted, but we're also communicating that information to our partners. And also in general, as I said, just having folks talking and making sure that they're raising awareness of the census goes a long way. And as a part of that, as just a final note, there is power in community. I know that's something a lot of organizations on this webinar don't need to be told, but I think it's something that definitely can't be underrated. The way we're talking to our members about engaging in the census is not just making sure that they themselves are counted, but making sure that their fellow workers and their fellow union members are also counted. So, you know, that goes everything from grabbing a coworker to fill out the census while you're doing it, to making sure that you're putting up flyers in the workplace saying, hey, April 1st, 2020 is coming up. You got to make sure you're counted. And we're also thinking about other ways of possibly engaging, such as setting up an ability for our members to be able to fill out the census in their union hall or in their union space, where they can be confident, be walked through the process, and also have that sense of community to know that they can trust that the information they're filling out is going to be safe, and also that the impact it's going to have is exactly what we have been talking about over these last couple of years in the campaign. So that's really ways national groups can really help engage in getting out the count. It's a lot of, you know, working with partners, making sure you're sharing information. And I think if there's one thing I have found about the census community that is so great, is the fact that folks always want to share information. They always want to be able to be of help as much as possible. And doing that and working in tandem with your partners, even folks who you don't work with regularly, can be very beneficial in just making communities aware, and also getting folks to want to be engaged themselves and as either organizers or just getting people involved. And so with that, I am done with my slides.
Thank you so much, John. So we definitely give folks an opportunity to ask questions. If you look at your GoToWebinar toolbar, you'll see a little hand that's waving at you. If you click it, you can raise your hand and ask a question. We'll unmute you. If you don't want to do that, you can chat us if you don't want us to hear your voice, and we'll ask the question for you. So I'll just pause and give an opportunity for folks to ask questions. Okay, it looks like we don't have any questions. Folks may be shy. Oh, we have a question. We're gonna get you unmuted. 1 second. Patricia, you should be unmuted now. Yep.
Yes, thank you, Beth. This is Patricia Williamson with the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. I had a question for Stacey, Carless, in terms of the North Carolina Count Coalition. I just wanted to know, in terms of your coalition, how are you structured? Are you structured more by the groups, perhaps, that are impacted, or are you more towards the region of North Carolina? How do you structure your coalition?
Sure. So we're structured a little bit more by the groups who are impacted. And so at our table, we have state-based nonprofit organizations that have access to more like grass top or community organizations that reach the hard to count communities we want to ensure are counted.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So it looks like we've got a texted question from Katie Smith asking if there will be a leadership conference toolkit to develop digital and comm strategy. And I'm assuming kind of that's probably generally around the campaign and for the day of action. Sonum, will there be a toolkit for the day of action?
Yes, so actually to answer both of those potential questions, yes, there will be a toolkit. It's going to be very robust, so we'll have language for the pledge card, we'll have messaging, we'll have talking points, we'll also have sample social and digital, but we're also going to open it up to the larger coalitions so that we can have some more specific messaging for hard to count communities. So we will be sending that around in mid-March, so keep an eye out for that. And then in terms of an actual toolkit for Get Out the Count, we will be also pulling together a toolkit that is kind of a collaboration among all of the different organizations in the amazing resources that they've created as well so that you all are fully prepared for GOTC. Thank you, Beth.
Right. Another quick question that we have from Katie is, will there be a rally on Capitol Hill on April 1, 2019? There are a number of events happening in the states on April 1, 2019. In Washington, D.C., there are a number of off-Hill events that we know are currently in development. Between the Census Bureau is hosting a press conference to release their tagline, and it will be kind of the first big press conference with Director Dillingham. So that will be happening late morning on April 1, 2019. There are also two other events that we know of so far happening in DC off-Hill. That being said, we're still in conversation with the Census Caucus on whether it makes sense to have a press conference or event on Capitol Hill. I think it will probably take the form of a press conference rather than a full rally, but if there are groups on the call that are interested in organizing a rally, please feel free to reach out to us afterwards and we can talk about that. But Hill engagement and member engagement will be a critical part of April 1, 2019, making sure that they have social guidance, that they have messaging and communications guidance, as well as opportunities that they can engage. So thank you for that question. One question that we have is, how will you address disinformation campaigns from non-government sources such as foreign governments? That's a great question. We've seen efforts to undermine elections in 2016 and 2018. We know that will likely happen around the 2020 census, as we've seen it already start, and also start with the 2020 elections. We will be continuing. We're in conversation with a number of key partners, including New America and Data and Society, about how we educate folks and promote strategies to prevent disinformation campaigns. And if you're interested in that work, please reach out to us. But yes, we're watching that very closely. It will be a subject of future webinars. So now we're going to go to Isra, who's raising his hand very patiently, or their hand very patiently. Isra?
Hi, thank you so much. Yes, Isra. I am with Access, the Arab Community Center for Economic and Social Services, and I wanted to thank everybody for this really informational webinar. My question is on a practicality level, because usually I'm the one that's on the ground working with the communities, and I've done this with voter engagement work. A lot of times, things that have helped them is having a sample of what the ballot will look like. So I don't know if anyone would be able to answer this question, but is there anything that we can provide folks with a sample of what it'll look like, just to kind of get their nerves, a little bit under control and like get them comfortable with filling it out? Especially for English being a second language for a lot of the folks that I work with too.
Yeah, I mean, Julie, Menin, or Stacey, do you want to share kind of what education efforts you're thinking about for folks? And I can also jump in too. Well, I'll go ahead and get that started. So right now, we've received the latest operations report from the Census Bureau. Like we mentioned, we expect that the final census form will be ready by June of 2019. And so we'll know whether or not the citizenship question is on the form. We'll have all of those details. And so starting in June, we'll have more details about how folks can educate their constituencies and communities about what the form looks like. That being said, we know that this is the first census with an online option, so not everyone is going to get a printed form. And so we will be providing a really, the Census Counts campaign and the Funders Census Initiative are partnering on a operation series to really get in the details of what will it look like when people receive their census card in the mail. So it'll be a card with a unique number. Then they can input that online. They can call the Census Bureau. And then what are the other kind of census operations? So if you're interested, we'll make sure that everyone on this call gets an invitation to that series by the Funder Census Initiative and the Census Counts campaign. It's a co-branded series of 6 webinars. If folks want to join that, we will be getting into that in detail. But I think that that's a great tactic to lift to ensure that folks understand how they fill out their census form, and we'll be sure to make that available.
Thank you so much.
So I have a question that was typed in, and it says, what is an example of a policy issue where we can incorporate 2020 census work into? What's a way to seamlessly add this as a blueprint to other or as a bullet point to other advocacy? That is a really good point. So we know that the census touches most federal programs and appropriate and is the underlying data for the distribution of $800 billion in federal funding. That funding touches healthcare. It touches reproductive health. So if you're the nation's largest family planning program for affordable birth control, Title 10, census data, that's how that happens. The free lunch program, the infrastructure and housing. So Section 8 is based on census data. So really any issue you can think of, if you're talking about labor, businesses use census data to determine where they open locations and how they decide how many people to hire. So if you're looking for a way to connect the census to your issues, it is really at the foundation of all the issues, many of the groups in the coalition work on. And so we're happy to help point you in the right direction of specific data that can help be a bullet point in your larger advocacy work. In addition, on April 1, 2019, we'll be launching the new version of the censuscounts.org website. On that website, we'll be breaking down census by issue and providing detailed points about how the census touches most aspects of our lives. And so that'll be a great resource for folks as well. And I'm just, I just want to correct something that I shared, and thank you, Terry Ann Lowenthal, for being on the line, that the paper form will be in English and Spanish only. So obviously we know that there are many other languages that key traditionally hard to count communities have speak, and so we'll be doing that outreach. And then also the mailings will be letters, not postcards. So I misspoke. It's a letter, not a postcard. All right. So with that, I just want to leave some folks with some key next steps. So here are 3 things that you can do. If you forget everything else we said, don't. But 3 things that you can do today. So educate your community about the importance of a fair and accurate 2020 census. Resources are available at censuscounts.org. 2, think about your GOTC engagement. If you need help, please reach out to Sonum Nerurkar and groups like SEIU, who are currently thinking about their GOTC engagement, are a great resource for that. 3, engage in the Census Day of Action on April 1, 2019, and you can reach out to Sonum for more information. And I also just want to flag some key dates. Those are on the screen here. You'll see March 14th, we know Commerce Secretary Ross is testifying before the House Oversight and Reform Committee. April 1 is the day of action. It's also the due date for the amicus briefs. And April 23rd is the oral arguments. We also know that during this period, we'll have congressional recess happening, and it's a great opportunity to organize your grassroots around the citizenship question and call on members of Congress to take action and really create some good peaks around that. So with that, I want to thank all of our speakers for taking the time. I want to thank the dozens of you that are still on the line and hung with us 15 minutes past the hour. Thank you. really just emphasize that we're here as a resource if you're interested in getting engaged around the census campaign work, and we hope you are. We're here to be helpful, and we'll make sure to get you plugged in or get you the resources that you need. Thank you very much for jumping on the phone.